My name's Andy Settle. I come from, is that too loud or is that good for you guys at the back? Yeah, I've got a thumbs up, that's awesome. Okay, so I've got 30 minutes to give you a presentation on the JAKU botnet. The good news is if you do fall asleep, we do have the papers online and I can give you a link or you can search for them. I'm going to kill that video for now because that's actually part of our data, which hopefully I'll have time for in a moment. And as I said, I'm from Forcepoint. 12 months ago, we were WebSense, and we got bought by Raytheon, and now we're called Forcepoint. I'm head of special investigations, which is part of the security labs. So I head up the special investigations team. I'm not going to read that out to you, but I'm going to draw your attention to the actual bottom part of that, is that we have quite a large labs infrastructure, quite a few people in there dotted all around the world. Those people do it's the 80-20 rule, if not even 95% rule. We do the 5% that's too sensitive. We have to deal with sensitive material, or we have to deal with law enforcement. Too complicated or complex, where people are going, what the dickens is going on? Or too time-consuming, because these guys have to get these protections in place when we're doing our email, our web, and our endpoint protections. We pick up, my favorite bit at the end, is the too weird stuff, the stuff that other people don't have that time or the expertise to look at, and I'm very fortunate for that. Now, about 6 months ago, beginning of October, and I think I did show some of the data when I was here last about some of this botnet that we've been tracking. This has been ongoing, it's not been the only piece of work we've been doing, but it's been an ongoing piece of activity that's been a piece of research. We're looking at a botnet, we knew it was there, and I'm going to go into that, tell you what we found, tell you some of the conclusions from it, and some of the things we haven't concluded about, some of the things that are still questions that are unanswered. We're going to put our hand up and say we haven't got all the answers. If I want to just come into the conversation or the presentation we just had before, this is about collaboration. We've managed to create some really great collaborations with law enforcement and other agencies and other parts of the industry so we can share some of our analysis and actually get into collaborative analysis. We don't want to get into a marketplace of I'll give you 4 data items if you give me 6 data. And all, no. We want to collaborate on analysis because intelligence is a process. It's not just a product. And what you're going to see all depends. I'm going to tie this into the big data thing because that's what we're here for today. You're seeing the tip of the iceberg of what we do. That's going to be some of the takeaways that I'm going to talk to you about. And I'm not going to talk about the machine learning and the other funky stuff that we do internally. These are the results of what we do. But a lot of what I will talk about does seem quite mandrolic, manual processes. Well, they are. And sometimes people look at this and they go, hey, that was easy. Well, actually, for every rabbit hole we went down, we probably went down 1,000 other rabbit holes that were in the same vicinity, and then we had to back out of them. So this is the story as it looks now looking back. And it's been a bit of a journey. So, without further ado, and I will pick those points up again at the end. I don't think there's any need I need to shout out at the moment, and that's the journey we're going to go on through there. I've got to give a bit of credit to our art department. They really pulled out the stops on the infographic for us, and I'm very, very pleased with it. And I've just got to say thank you, guys, and it is wonderful. I've got a smile on my face for that one. Now, okay. We look at other people's data, just like academic research goes and does all the literature searches and goes and checks everything out. We do that on a daily basis because we want to create protection for our customers from the things that other people have found. And this is, truth be known, this came from us reading one of the earlier dark hotel reports that Kaspersky put out. Well, in that report, it mentioned a couple of things in there. I think it was probably the DNS entries and IP addresses. And if I go too technical, that's not technical, I know, but I will go a bit tech on this. I apologize for that. I've got to do it at this level to get through the story. So there's stuff later on that I might lose some of you on, and just apologies there for that. So DNS entries, IP, we pivot off those. You should have heard of pivoting. We take that data item saying, now that we know this, what else can we find? when we're looking around. For instance, if it's a 1.2.3.4 IP address, we can use techniques like passive DNS and say what previous entries in DNS were referring to 1.2.3.4. And whoever registered wibble.com, that's just a random example, that's not a real example, what else have they registered in the same time frame? And we came across a URL path, and in this case, which I don't have a pointy thing, so I will just indicate with my hand, right at the top, you can see that there are pictures. If you search for near.jpg on Google, they're the images you get. Well, if you actually see below that, can you see that at the back? Anybody nodding on the text down here? Can you see that it's index of /img? So we went to certain IP addresses where we knew badness had previously happened or were used by guys that had done bad things in the past in relation either directly or indirectly to Dark Hotel. And we found this path called /img. Nothing strange about that. Bit bad that it's actually world readable, but that's not a massive error. And to find a file called near.jpg in that directory isn't strange either. What is strange is that near.jpg is 451 meg in size. That's one hell of an image. And it was just that. It was just somebody getting lucky and then seeing that there was a 451 meg JPEG file in that directory. Well, actually, that makes us stop and think, because that's what special investigations are there to do. We go and say, so what, and wait on a lot of the time and ask each other these questions. So can we then go and feed back into the rest of the business, into our labs, of new concepts of the rules, and this is a real trivial one, go and look for huge images. If there's a huge image coming across the wire, what is it? Flag it up. It's a point. It's only a data point. It's not an indicator of compromise. It's probably an indicator when combined with other indicators that would actually then start showing something unusual going on. Not in this case, because you'll find that this file wasn't really downloaded by our customers. So what do we do with that? Well, the first thing you do is you get onto your favorite command line, and you go and do file, the wonderful Linux tool file. And we can see that's not a JPEG file at all. That's an SQLite database. So then you go on the next part of the command line, you go and use your SQLite command to go and dump the schema out. Yeah, it is a database. And it's got some interesting tables in there. It's got a table called child, which I'll explain in a moment. And it's got another one called history. There's some telemetry data in there in the history file, and that's something I haven't got time to show today, but the child one is really interesting. Now, of course, bad guys don't offer their documentation up, and as a consequence, we have to write it for them. And in this case, we've got what we believe quite strongly the definition of that SQLite database is. I'll draw your attention to UID. Every victim has a unique ID. And that's really important because these guys will be moving around. These guys will get a new IP address every time they dial in if they're using a mobile connection, or even their ISP might come back with a different IP address on their broadband connection. But also they may use drop-ins and they may use a Wi-Fi in cafes and places like this. So the UID is unique to them. That sits in their registry. Then you've got the version number. So all these pieces of malware that were actually part of this botnet all have a unique ID in them themselves. That sits in the registry. We've even found victims that have been infected twice with two different versions, or two or more different versions. Crucially then PIP, the public IP address. Now, this is now starting to get really interesting. So we know what their public, what their ISP is. So who their provider is, you can then just start geolocating from the public provider. But most of all is info. Info, and I will show this in a second, is the first piece of reconnaissance, the exfiltration of system information with some really crucial information in there that we wouldn't want to divulge even in our personal lives. And IP list, you can forget that. The other three items in there are the info uptime. When that piece of info that I'm going to show you in a second was updated, that's quite good. You know how fresh it is, thanks guys. You've got the install time. Awesome. We can then start seeing the lifetime of this on the victim machines. We can see when it was installed, and we can see the last time it called home, the last time it beaconed back to this command and control server. Now, we found this in one place. And I'll just run through some examples, but it gets a little bit more complicated quite quickly. Before I go to the next slide after this, can anybody read Japanese here? Promise? Good. Okay, right. I'll explain in a moment. I don't want to offend anyone. You can see on the left-hand side, it's all very nice. You should have seen that if you're a bit of a geek. You type in system info, and that's what comes out. That's what's part of the information in the info column of that database. On the right-hand side, it makes it an absolute mare of a time to go and parse it because it's all in different languages. We found lots of different languages, and Microsoft, bless their cotton socks, have gone and formatted it ever so slightly differently depending on the language and the locale that's set for those machines. But we did it, and we got all that normalized, we got all that collated into a database. So the next one is where we start getting really interested. I'm going to just check that you can see what it says, so pardon me for turning around on you. Yes, okay, that should be good enough. The left-hand side of the picture there is showing you the processes that are running. Now, again, you don't have to do a show of hands, but please, someone smile to say that they're a David Bowie fan. Anybody? Yeah, two, awesome. So, I found out in hindsight that I'm just showing my age with this next reference. So 3 lines from the bottom on the left-hand side is a process called tvc15.exe. Now, tvc15 is a David Bowie track. That was us, because we didn't know which botnet that we were in, so we decided to rename our command.exe to actually tvc15, so then we could go and trawl through the telemetry data in these databases that we're finding. I'm now using the plural of databases because there's not just one, and we found out which one we were in. And indeed, tasklist.exe is another part of the malware that this botnet is part of. Top right-hand corner for you is the Japanese for some fairly weird pornography files, and there's a lot of copyright theft in terms of videos, in terms of mainly videos, and crack software as well. And I will touch on the piracy, as I said, later again. And some of the translation there, there's the one that I can read out is that Hotel Transylvania, because that's clearly a copyright theft issue that's going on there. But Hollywood Sex Wars is probably something a little bit more niche. Underneath that is just the sample that we've got. We've got lots of examples of the listing of the most recently used files, and also the listing of the My Documents and the favorites. So we can see what the bad guy, let's put it in their terms, the bad guy can see what those guys have been on their machines doing since that's been, or before that was updated with the info column. And we've chosen passports there because most of them are passports images. And yeah, it's not good. I can't do much detail on this for pretty obvious reasons when we start talking about the abbreviation DPRK. It's in there, and it's a fact it's in there, that there are references to DPRK. So that's Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is North Korea. There are connections, and if you've seen any of the press releases we put out, there are connections with Pyongyang and North Korea in terms of the victims, either directly or indirectly, and a very tiny subset of the victims. We're talking tens, not hundreds, and certainly not the tens of thousands of victims that we're seeing in this whole campaign. I'd like to talk more about it, but it's not right or proper to talk about that in great detail here. Now, if anyone's gone and looked at kits like this before, there should be no surprises in there. They're what the commands are. This is a pretty simple, straightforward trick that's done by, I don't like the term APT because I'm not describing this as APT, but when people discuss the advanced persistent threat attacks and the earlier stages of that, that's the recon, the reconnaissance stage that's at work there. Finding what the system info is, seeing what the network setup is, what users there are, what's actually mounted, what shares are available, in other words, what tasks are running, what network connections there are. And interestingly enough, with the reference to the DPRK, we call that the raccoon set so that we don't then get into any muddle over, say, in Korea. because we have to make it clear that there is a targeted set that's within this larger set of people. That net stat is missing. So again, there's an exercise to the reader here. Why would they remove that from that specific targeting? Why would they not want to know what the network setup was? Or sorry, correction, what the network connections were for those odd number of people that are of great interest. Here comes the complicated bit, not in terms of techie, but where it starts getting messy. It's not just one command and control server. It's a number of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. About 10 or so. The blacked out ones, as you can see, are the raccoon set. That's the ones I mentioned earlier. And the reason they appear 3 times is that that moves around. So they're using DNS to call back home, and then sometimes that gets moved around to a different server where that command and control server is. And if you look on your right-hand side, you'll see in there that the victim counts are significantly different. Now, make that a bit easier. I can plot that for you. So if you look at the collars, don't worry too much about the detail. It just gives you a feel for this. We know what the ASNs are. The ASNs are the autonomous system numbers. That's the bit behind the routing information for IPs. They're the guys that control those IP addresses that you see on column 2. And in that case, you've got the locations, because you can work out who they are, of the service provider, not necessarily users. Right, so in which case we've got here the colors are those different command and control servers, and where they are is what part of the world they are. We can see that it's fairly localized where the bad guys are running their command and control servers from. Now the victims. The victims, over time, because we've been analyzing this for 6 months, we're very lazy, we automate everything, so we've been collecting this data as an automated process for 6 months, and we can see the strange things happening there. Each one of those lines is a different botnet, and there are, as you can see, some unusual blips. They come, they go. One argument there is that their system isn't very reliable. Some of their databases are in a real mess. There are a lot of corrupt data in there, a lot of messy data in there. These could be cleanups. And even their security isn't brilliant as well, because on at least one occasion, on a Friday afternoon, one of their machines gets taken over by a group that are trying to run a credit card scam in Spain, and then come about Monday morning, they take control back again. Well, that indicates to us that it's a business rather than guys in their back bedrooms doing it, because most guys in their back bedrooms would sort that out over the weekend. It looks like a 9-to-5 affair. I'll add all those numbers together, and you can see, sorry, by the way, that bottom line, that red line running across the bottom is that raccoon, those 1s and 2s, the small numbers. And then you've got in aggregation, the number of victims fluctuating over time, going up, dropping down. We don't have an answer for that. That's another admission that we don't know why that is. But what we can do, because we've got all that information, we can start analyzing by country and by language. And we're clearly getting a picture now that the victims are being targeted very clearly, geographically and linguistically. Now, we don't know how they do that targeting, how they're zeroing in on them, because we do notice that the data is coming from all around the world. We've got people in every continent, and that's the bird's eye view. It's a heat map, so the redder it is, the more victims are there. I'll zoom in onto the APAC region, and you can see there that it's clear that there's a hotspot over in Japan and Korea. And if I go in again, you can see that the victims are heavily weighted towards Japan and Korea. This slide, next slide, causes us huge challenges, and do not draw any conclusions or don't jump to any conclusions by it, because a lot of that is open space. But there are no, statistically you can see over there that there's a blip in Moscow, whereas a few. But other things we are tracking at the moment, and we can show those graphs, those maps, sorry, of that data, are scattered, the 1s and 2s scattered all over Russia. This doesn't appear anywhere apart from Moscow ISPs. Now, And I do really, really seriously say don't jump to any conclusions, because it could be a language, it could be a time zone, and it could be a geographic targeting. It could be using those three aspects to zone in on where these people are. And maybe it's a language issue, that there's nobody that's using computers that's behaving in the way that they're being targeted. They would be targeted, they're in that area. But it does look unusual. Right, okay, so touching back on something that we heard earlier from the previous speaker is about the dwell time. I've got some good news in here, is that we can spot who the corporates are, and there aren't many of them. Now, you can say, well, actually, they may not be targeted. We don't think that, but we can't put anything firm on that. But what we can do with those victims that are corporates, that they are clearly a lot better off than the non-corporates. It's a good news story that that their dwell time, as we like to call it, is much lower, but it's still not good enough. 93 days on average, and there's one guy in there that was 348, but it's a tiny percentage. But most of all, these guys, these victims, are people with unlicensed versions of software, unlicensed versions of Windows, unlicensed versions of, and cracked versions of codecs for movies that they want to watch and download. And I will whistle through now. This gets a bit geeky, but this is where we go, wait on, there's some really strange things. This isn't a normal botnet. So we've got this thing called, and this wasn't our name for it, was it? There's references to R2-D2, so I think we called it R2-D3, but there were a couple of Star Wars references in there. If you look at the top, we do the same trick. We find a PNG on one of the servers, and that server has got a large PNG on there. We thought, brilliant, so we did file on it. No, it's not. It is a PNG. But you actually look at the orange bit that's up there, that's the dimensions, that's the XY size of that PNG. That is not a normal PNG file. I don't know how big that number is, but that's a very big screen you would be displaying that on. So we found out that it was an encrypted payload buried within something that looked like a PNG. It would display, it would burn your memory up, but it would burn you, it would display. It's got a compression algorithm there. It's got detection, whether Bitdefender's on that machine. If Bitdefender's on that machine, it doesn't do anything and goes away. Discuss. It goes and does a stealth injection into Internet Explorer, and it creates a service. We reverse engineered the code, and that's why it says RC4. Rule number one of writing crypto, don't write crypto, because someone else will do it better, and someone better will actually go and break yours. And in this case, we did that, and that's how we actually decrypted it, because they trucked RC4 and they thought they'd modify it, which was game over for them. And then it's got secure file deletion. It's got an algorithm very similar to the DoD erase pattern. I say very similar, because it took us a week or so to track down exactly what the algorithm was. And the algorithm was actually coded up by a guy called John Underwood. We know that because we contacted John, and we said, did you ever write your code in C? And he went, no, I've never written it in C. I wrote it in C#, and there's a couple of bugs in it, so I never rewrote it. I just left it on my website, and that was it. And we went, well, yeah, that's funny, because we found it written in C, in a piece of malware, and they copied your bugs. So we knew it was a copy of his because it actually had the same coding errors in it. They'd fixed one, which is the second from the bottom on there, about the file truncation, but they'd actually left one of his coding errors in. So it's great to go and talk to the people and find out where it came from. Code reuse, there's a theme going on here. I hadn't come across this, and I've got to be honest, I had never seen this one before. UDT, which is a resilient communication mechanism. This is the second form of command and control we found in there. There's your classic domain generation algorithm. There's a DNS covert channel as well that it uses for command and control, but it also uses UDT. Well, outside the supercomputing world, and if anyone can shout at me later about this, because we've never come across anyone else that's dealt with UDT, it's an unusual piece of code to actually be using. And then finally on the command and control, we only found this by doing a proofread of a final draft of the report. As you can see, I've highlighted there, and it was me just finally reading it one night and thinking, have we actually ever Googled that piece of text that I've highlighted? That piece of text is the boundary for a post request, a HTML post request. and it's the boundary marker. And well, it looks slightly unusual. It's fairly generic, HCMPFD boundary. Well, let's do it anyway. Guess what? Well, guess what? There are 4 hits on the whole of the internet for that piece of text. And it first comes to a .h file, so written in C again, a .h file. That .h file declares a C++ class, which of course then has public, so we go and look at the public variables, because if we then go and plug those into Google, we'll find other pieces of source code that refer to that H file, which is the one at the bottom. And then the one at the bottom led us to the one on your right-hand side, which is where they got that source code from. And when we compile it up, it looks almost identical. That was written in 2011 in Korean. All the comments are in Korean. And as an analyst, then you go, well, I can say with some level of certainty that whoever used that piece of code is a Korean native speaker, because you're not going to go that far out of your way to go and copy a piece of code from an obscure blogging site that's written in Korean, which is actually a generic piece of HTTP request code anyway. No accusations about the author in any way, shape, or form, but it did give us that final insight to what the language of the author or authors are. So the takeaways. Copyright theft. These guys are getting infected because they are not that caring about their infrastructure, their personal hardware. They don't care about using cracked versions of Windows, cracked codecs for videos, and maybe cracked software as well. So they've probably not got AV or a firewall on there. But within that, there is precision targeting, very surgical level precision targeting with some very interesting people. And we have contacted the right people about that, and we're helping them. The C2 databases, why would you go and publish your command and control database to the general public and then still leave it there 2 weeks after our report has made quite a big splash in the papers, and made a in the press, and made a fairly big splash over with the Korean CERT guys, and we're dealing with them. 3 forms of covert and resilient command and control systems, pretty funky stuff, and then going and reusing some of the code. If you can't remember any of that, look out for this. If you can't remember the full URL at the top, then just remember that blogs.forcepoint.com, because you'll find everything I've just spoken about there on our blog post site. And 27 minutes according to me.
Does anyone have any quick questions for Andy while we get Ben's presentation ready? Don't be shy. Some great insights there into what you can and can't find out.
Go on, you must have one. Yay.
Just the statistics about that we did geographically, it was Japan and Korea mainly, and also linguistically it was Japan and Korea, Korean languages. So, but is there a correlation with the Japanese people who are in Japan?
No. So in Japan, it's predominantly Japanese language, and Korea, it's predominantly Korean. And equally, when you look at the data for the west and east coast of America, West Coast appears to be more centered around Korean, and the East Coast is more centered around Japanese. We've got quite a bit more to do on there, but we've got other investigations to do. So as a consequence, we can go, well, actually, this is a call for help here. If anyone's interested in working with us in future on this, because we have got some more questions like that raising from it, then we're all up for that. We're not here to hide this data. There's quite a lot of sensitive personal information in there that we can't share, but we have to be right and appropriate. But that's the kind of question that we don't have the full answer to. We've got those answers, but not the full answer. Is that good? Shoot.
The engagement, how closely do you work with customers to be okay with this?
Right. Okay, I'll try and do this in 30 seconds. So there are 2 customers I was in. I'm going to speak quickly because of the amount of information I've got to give you. 2 customers were in there, and we saw those in the corporate data set. And so what we did is we reached straight out to them. Really interesting story there, which I do on the longer presentation. The first one was a large US manufacturing organization, and the reason that they got victims on there was because that they had just two laptop users who, when they were on the road, And when they went home, they didn't dial in, didn't connect to their VPNs. Our protection was put on there when you connected to the VPN, so their protection didn't exist until they connected to the VPN. So we informed them of that, and they went and reconfigured it. So it was the weak link, and that's a really important story here. It's only ones and twos that can just get through, and your infrastructure becomes screwed. There's a technical term in there. Now, the second one was a really, really interesting lesson as well, which was a large civil engineering company, international civil engineering company that did an M&A, mergers and acquisitions, about 3 or 4 months ago. And what had happened was the organization which they'd subsumed, ironically from APAC region, had got problems. And because of the conjoining the two networks, it had come in and it was beaconing out. But what we'd managed to do is, but when the M&A had then kicked into place, it had stopped and we noticed it go offline. And then we noticed it had become one of our customers, because before then it hadn't been one of our customers. So we deal very closely with our customers, as we do. Big shout out to the Europol guys. We've been speaking to them. We spoke out a little bit to Interpol, but the National Crime Agency have been really wonderful with us, and UK CERT are awesome as well. We've been sharing as much as we can whenever we can. Was that quick enough?
It was good. You had your hand up.
Was the blog primarily, Botnet primarily focused on intellectual property or payment cards, and is it unusual or what, hundreds, thousands?
I'm going to do that Scooby-Doo moment. That's what's really weird about this. We don't know what's going to happen next. If you go and read back to who we think this is, in terms of actors' behavior, not attribution to individuals, is that they're grooming, probably not the right word, but preparing smaller botnets as resilient infrastructure so I could lose one and I've still got 6 or 7 available. I grow them to just the right size and then I deploy them and use them. So the use might not have been decided yet. The use may come in future when they decide what that operation is going to be.
Andy's going to be here all day, so you can ask him more questions.
The morning, actually.
Sorry. All right, okay. Andy's going to be here until coffee, so you can ask him questions at lunchtime. And yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it.